Politics. On Monday the 30th, the Japanese House began debating the new budget for the next fiscal year, which in Japan starts in April. Kishida faced strong questioning on his plan to secure 43 trillion yen per year over the next 5 years for increasing the defense budget and doubling the one for birthday policies. What's interesting, and also a sign of weakness, on which I'll expand upon in a minute, is that the critics came both by the opposition and by members of Kishida's own party. While the opposing Constitutional Democratic Party attacked on the lack of specifics provided by Kishida and the contradicting statements between LDP heavyweights, members of the LDP did just that. In particular, Koichi Hagiuda, LDP policy chief and former economy minister, asked Kishida when any tax would go in effect, and Kishida sidestepped the question. In this scenario, Hagiuda belongs to the part of LDP that opposes the tax hikes while supporting the increase in defense spending, which they want to fund mainly by increasing the national debt. But whether or not Kishida will follow through with the tax hike could be left up to the voters. As a matter of fact, it is also Monday's news that Kishida is struggling with very low approval ratings. A Nikkei poll conducted the previous weekend found that Kishida's cabinet has an approval rating of only 39%, and conversely, 63% of the respondents wants the government to call for anticipated elections ahead of the tax hikes. Other polls agree basically on the same statistics, with the notable exception of a Kyodo News poll where the percentage of people in favor of anticipated elections climbs up to 77%. These figures are in line with the declining trend of Kishida's popularity, plagued by a series of scandals, including the Unification Church cult scandal, the resignation of 3 ministers, and the latest about his son. Allegedly, while Kishida was visiting England in his trip to some of the G7 countries, his son Shotaro, also his executive secretary, went shopping in London for neckties for the rest of the cabinet using official vehicles. If you consider that days before this scandal broke out, Kishida stated that he wants to run for a second term, the situation appears pretty clear to me. I think we will see anticipated elections happening, and Kishida is just waiting for the most favorable moment to call people to the polls after all the scandals blow over. Maybe in one of projected authority, as CDP leader Kenta Izumi stated, probably right after the G7 in May. And speaking of money, soon the government will have to choose the next governor of the Bank of Japan, the central bank of the country comparable to the Federal Reserve for the US and the European Central Bank for Europe. This occurrence is sparking talks of gender equality and diversity, but to know more about that, be sure to tune in tomorrow for my news analysis video. Switching to foreign politics. Everyone here knows what NATO is, right? The military alliance between the US, Canada, and 28 European countries. Well, if you didn't, now you know that this alliance doesn't include Japan, even though the country has a privileged military alliance with the US. But things could soon change in the future. On January 31st, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg visited Japan for his East Asia tour, and the two countries released a joint statement that I'll leave you in its entirety in the description. To give you a little bit of context, last June marked the first time a Japanese Prime Minister joined an official NATO summit, the one that was held in Madrid. After that day, Japan decided to join NATO's Individually Tailored Partnership Program, a framework of cooperation focused on each partner's objective. That news, coupled with the joint statement released on Tuesday, are extremely important because we're seeing the power balance of the world shifting under our own eyes. During their meeting, Kishida and Stoltenberg expressed concerns about North Korea's threat and the growing cooperation between China and Russia, which includes joint operations near Japan's coasts. Therefore, they both reiterated the two parties' opposition to what's now being addressed as quote-unquote unilateral attempts of changing the status quo by force, a clear reference to China's interests in Taiwan. And among other things, they also vowed more cooperation for what concerns cyberspace, outer space, intel sharing, and fighting disinformation. As a result, Kishida announced that Japan will establish its first permanent representative office for NATO in Belgium in 2023. Next news, same topic. Last week, on January 27th, Bloomberg reported that the United States have secured a deal with Netherlands and Japan to restrict exports of some advanced chip-making machinery to China. This follows a period of increasing restrictions that the US decided to enact against China for what concerns the strategic semiconductor market. But if until now the restrictions applied only to chips made in the US or using American designs, this new deal will now extend to equipment to build any kind of semiconductor in the first place, and this could really hurt Japan. Japan, which once dominated the global chip manufacturing, now makes around 1/10 of the world's semiconductor, lagging behind Taiwan, for instance one of the reasons for China's claims, and South Korea. But if past restrictions didn't have much of an effect for this reason, the country is also a major supplier of machines used to make these semiconductors. Akira Minamikawa, analyst at OMDIA Research Company, noted that in order to make up for the lost profits, Japan will have to increase its exports toward US, Germany, and India. But that could not be enough if the deal will also ban Japanese engineers from supporting their customers. We still don't know the details of the deal, but expect this to be a hot topic in the following months. Next, a follow-up on the wartime laborers issue. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please go watch my last week video on the topic where I explained that in detail. Apparently, Japan is considering to reintroduce South Korea in its trading countries whitelist. This means that South Korea would receive preferential treatment for what concerns trading and customs. Why did I introduce this as relating to the wartime laborers issue? Because South Korea lost that status in 2019 as retaliation from Japan when in 2018 the South Korean Supreme Court seized the assets of the two companies involved in the dispute. And exactly because of that, this move says way more than it seems, because it comes exactly at the time when the negotiations have reached a standstill. Japan doesn't want to issue a public apology to the Korean victims, and Seoul is not budging on the proposal. So it seems to me that this move is to be intended as an incentive, if not a threat, from Japan to have Seoul drop the apology claims. And even more interestingly, this news came exactly 1 day after the reported semiconductors deal I mentioned before. South Korea was a major importer of microchips from Japan before 2018, and being whitelisted again would implicitly encourage the country to buy back from Japan instead of China. If I'm right, it might mean there could be a strong US influence behind the renewed talks over settling the wartime labor issue, and we might see American actors appear on the scene, maybe as mediators, maybe as something more. And for the last news of the day, let's talk about PFAS. The term PFAS refers to two groups of chemical compounds used in various coatings such as water and oil repellents. But you might know them as forever chemicals, as they are commonly described, because they remain in the environment for a long time without breaking down. But the worst thing is that the modern water purification plants are still not capable to isolate the PFAS. The news is that on Monday, a Tokyo citizens group announced that it had detected high concentrations of PFAS in some western Tokyo's residents' blood. Japan has no guidelines for measuring their concentrations in the bloodstream, so residents were tested under German standards. The highest detected concentration of PFOs and PFOA was respectively 35.8 and 18.6 nanograms. The German standard per milliliter for each chemical is respectively 20 nanograms and 10 nanograms, so almost half of the amount found in the patients. There is still a lot of research to be done in this field, but numerous studies linked the buildup of PFAS in the human body to an increased risk of developing some serious diseases and conditions. Therefore, in 2021, the Japanese government banned the manufacturing and use of these compounds. So how is it possible? Well, the last time a similar situation was recorded, it had to do with the pollution caused by an American military base, and other possible causes are believed to be factories and airports. But according to the Japanese government, there is not enough scientific knowledge on the harmful effect of the substances to justify legal action against these polluting actors. That's it. I'm Kei, and this is Japan This Week. Thank you for watching, and if you like my work, please share these videos, leave a comment, like, and subscribe. See ya!